Chapter 1. The Groundskeeper. The dawn light over Montpelier was a pale, washed-out gray, more ash than gold, stretching across the sky like a bloodless wound. It filtered through the tree branches that clawed at the air above the old Civil War Memorial Park, their limbs skeletal and creaking in the early autumn breeze. Dew slicked the grass like cold sweat on dead skin. The world felt forgotten here, left behind. Howard Ellis fit the place. He moved with the gait of a man whose bones had carried too much weight for too many years. Tall but stooped, muscles like old rope under a flannel shirt, faded jeans stained with oil, grass, and time. His face, lined, weather-beaten, eyes sunken but alert, spoke of a man not easily startled but always aware. His right hand bore a tremor that had never left since Da Nang. He was a Vietnam vet, though he never talked about it. Didn't need to. The silence did it for him. The town had long since moved on from the memorial grounds. The local kids had TikToks and vape clouds, not stories of Gettysburg or Shiloh. The cannon, an ancient wrought-iron piece set on a cracked concrete pedestal at the center of the clearing, was treated more like a backdrop for selfies than a sacred relic. No one remembered what regiment it had once belonged to. No one cared. Except Ellis. Every morning he walked the perimeter, boots crunching leaves like broken teeth. He picked up trash, beer cans, cigarette butts, fast food wrappers, and tossed them into the rusted metal bin near the gates. He trimmed the hedges, scraped graffiti off the bronze plaques, and kept the old paths from being completely swallowed by moss and decay. There was comfort in the ritual. Predictability. Order. It was what kept the bad nights at bay, the ones where Ellis would wake up drenched in sweat, heart hammering, lips whispering radio codes to men who died 50 years ago. In the quiet, among the crumbling stones and forgotten names, the ghosts of Vietnam didn't seem to whisper as loud. On that particular night, early October, the air was unnaturally still, not peaceful, suffocating. The sky had turned the color of overripe fruit, and not a single bird made a sound. Ellis lit a cigarette and sat on the worn wooden bench facing the cannon, watching the fog slink in like a predator on its belly. He exhaled a stream of smoke and frowned. The cannon had always unsettled him, just a little, not because of what it was, but how it felt. It didn't sit like a memorial. It perched, like a thing waiting, like it could wake up if you blinked the wrong way. He remembered vividly the first time he heard the stories. Locals whispering about the cannon firing on its own. Urban legend crap. No powder, no crew, no explanation, just a thunderous blast echoing across the park when no one was around. Teenagers roasted on Reddit for claiming they'd seen it shift. Elders swore they heard a voice in the recoil. No one could prove anything. No one wanted to. Ellis didn't believe in ghost stories. At least, not until that night. The boom came just after midnight. It wasn't thunder. It was deeper, heavier, a gut-churning crack that rattled the earth beneath him and sent a flock of invisible birds screaming out of the trees. The bench shook beneath him. His cigarette dropped to the ground, forgotten. The cannon stood in silhouette against the fog, motionless. Ellis stood slowly. Every nerve screamed against old pain as he walked toward it. No smoke, no scorch marks, no smell of gunpowder, just silence. He examined the ground around the cannon. Scuffed, sure, but no impact crater, no debris, no shell. The trees behind it had no damage. There was nothing. Nothing but that feeling, the sensation that the air had been peeled back, just for a moment, and something vast had blinked at him. He turned in a slow circle, every hair on his neck standing upright. "Just a goddamn flashback," he muttered, voice gravelly with smoke and age. "You're not back in the jungle, Ellis. You're in Vermont. This is just a patch of dirt with a rusty gun." But he couldn't quite convince himself, not completely. When he looked back at the cannon, it seemed just a little different. Not moved, not rotated, just watching. Ellis stepped back, his boot brushing against the shattered husk of a squirrel, its tiny body twisted, crushed, almost unrecognizable. The blood was fresh, the flesh still steaming, but there was no wound, no burn, just compression, like something had sucked the life out of it in an instant. His breath fogged in the cold night. The silence was thick again. He didn't sleep that night. He sat on the bench, shotgun across his lap, and stared at the cannon until morning light finally spilled across the trees, breaking the spell. By sunrise, it looked like a cannon again. Inert. Innocent. Just a piece of history. Ellis went about his chores like nothing had happened. But he didn't throw away the squirrel's remains. He buried them. And he didn't tell anyone what he'd seen, because something deep in his bones told him that this thing, whatever it was, wasn't done yet. And neither was he. Chapter 2. Ghosts in the Fog. The fog began as a thin veil, no different from the usual Vermont mists that rolled off the Winooski River on cold nights. But over the course of a week it thickened until it was more like smoke than air, dense, wet, and strangely warm. It would creep into the memorial grounds just after dusk, dragging itself along the ground like some living thing, spilling over the cracked stone walkways, coiling around the marble pillars and rising in tendrils up the flagpole, where the tattered Union banner flapped listlessly. By midnight it was so heavy that Ellis could barely see the trees at the edge of the clearing, their shapes twisting into something crooked and wrong in the murk. It didn't smell like river fog. It smelled faintly of iron and something acrid, like a fire that had been doused in blood. Ellis had been working the night shift ever since the incident, with the cannon's mysterious blast. He'd told no one, but his hands shook more now, and he smoked twice as much. The fog clung to his skin like sweat and made his lungs feel heavy. Even his flashlight seemed weaker when he shone it through the mist. Its beam swallowed a few feet from the lens. The first animal was a crow. He found it on a Wednesday morning, sprawled on the stone steps of the memorial like a discarded rag. Its feathers were blackened at the edges, curling and brittle, yet there were no flames, no smell of gasoline, no evidence of a predator. The bird's beak was open in a frozen scream, and its eyes, cloudy, boiled-looking, stared up at nothing. When Ellis touched it with his boot, its body crumbled slightly, like a burned log collapsing into ash. The next night there were two more. On the third, a stray dog. That one rattled Ellis worse than the birds. It was a big animal, maybe a shepherd mix, and he found it by following the sound of flies in the fog. The smell hit him before the sight did. Scorched meat and singed hair. When his flashlight beam found the body, he stopped cold. The dog had been cooked, not burned by fire, but blackened. The fur gone in patches, skin blistered and ruptured. The limbs were twisted as if some immense pressure had forced its joints the wrong way. Its tongue lolled from its mouth, stiff and cracked. There were tracks near it in the damp grass, paw prints, circling back toward the cannon. They stopped about 2 feet from the weapon's base. Past that, nothing. Just the iron monster looming in the fog, the barrel pointed upward, like a dark finger accusing the sky. Ellis swallowed hard. He didn't pick up the dog. He left it where it lay until morning when animal control could cart it off. Even then, they didn't know what to write in the report. Cause of death, unknown trauma. He could tell by the way they avoided his eyes that they were disturbed too. By the end of the week, the fog came every night without fail, like clockwork. Ellis began to think of it as a living entity. It moved differently depending on where he walked. If he approached the cannon, it would shift slightly, swirling around the pedestal as if in reverence. Sometimes, just on the edge of his vision, he could swear he saw shapes moving within it. Shapes that didn't belong. Shadows of men in tattered uniforms, bayonets glinting dully in the moonlight. and shadows of bayonets with hooked bayonets glinting dully in the moonlight. Faces pale and eyeless, emerging for half a heartbeat before slipping back into the mist. He tried to capture it on camera. The town had granted him a small budget to install 3 motion-hindered security cams around the memorial. He set one near the flagpole, one at the gate, and one directly facing the cannon. They worked fine during the day, but at night, as soon as the fog rolled in, every feed aimed at the cannon dissolved into static, jagged black and white snow that hissed softly from the monitor like a radio between stations. The cams facing the gate or the path stayed clear, but anything focused on the weapon itself simply failed. Sometimes the static seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Ellis took the tapes to the sheriff, but the man just shrugged. "Old equipment," he said. "Moisture's getting to it." He didn't sound convinced. The SCP Foundation's involvement started small, almost invisible. 2 men in dark coats came to the park one afternoon, introducing themselves as researchers from a historical preservation group. They asked routine questions about the cannon, its history, recent vandalism. Ellis answered carefully, withholding the strange events. But one of the men, a pale, wiry figure with eyes like drills, lingered at the cannon for a long time, pressing his palm against the iron as if feeling for a pulse. The next day, Ellis spotted a discreet black van parked at the edge of the lot. Its windows were tinted, its engine off. He saw no one inside, but he felt eyes on him whenever he walked too close. A new box appeared near the gate, disguised as a trash can, but Ellis caught the faint red blink of a hidden sensor inside. The Foundation had marked this place. He knew it in his gut. And every night, the fog grew thicker, the animals fewer, and the silence heavier. The memorial was changing, as if something old and buried had begun to stir under the weight of 100 forgotten years. Ellis tried to convince himself he was imagining things, that the cannon was just a cannon, that the fog was just weather, that the bodies were just coincidence. But on the 7th night, as he walked his patrol, he heard it again. A deep, distant boom rolling through the mist, like the echo of artillery across an unseen battlefield. The ground trembled softly under his boots. And when he turned toward the cannon, he saw them, just for a moment, dozens of figures standing shoulder to shoulder in the fog, bayonets fixed, their uniforms shredded and blood-dark, faces pale as wax. No eyes, no mouths, just empty sockets turned toward him. Then the mist shifted, and they were gone. The cannon sat silent in their place, its barrel angled ever so slightly toward the black van at the edge of the lot. Ellis backed away slowly, breath ragged. Whatever haunted this place wasn't just ghosts. It was something older, something armed. Chapter 3. First Blood. The memorial was a hollowed-out cathedral of silence that night. The fog came early, thicker than ever, curling low and heavy across the ground, swallowing sound and color alike. It wasn't just a mist now. It was a weight pressing on Ellis's skin, a humidity that smelled like hot iron and scorched wood. He'd been pacing his usual patrol, boots scuffing the moss-slick stones, when the noise reached him. A muffled giggle, the crack of a can opening, the hiss of spray paint. Ellis stopped dead. He knew the sound. Teenagers. He'd run them off before, little punks who treated the memorial like a playground. But the cannon had been restless lately, the fog too strange, the animals too dead. His gut told him this night was different. There was prayer coming from the building, and the note was directed toward them. He crept through the mist, flashlight off, using only the weak moonlight leaking through the clouded sky. Shadows shifted ahead, 3 figures near the cannon, their shapes jerky and blurred by the fog. 2 boys, 1 girl. They'd vaulted the low fence and brought backpacks. One boy was shaking a can of red spray paint, rattling like a snake. The girl had a hammer, chipping at one of the marble plaques. Ellis's hands clenched. He opened his mouth to shout, then hesitated. The air around the cannon felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. The mist wasn't just drifting now, it was circling, spiraling around the weapon's base like a living storm. The boy with the spray paint leaned close to the cannon's barrel, laughing, his voice echoing too loud in the thick air. "Check it out," he jeered. "Old fart gun?" He drew a crude symbol across the iron, some kind of smiley face dripping scarlet. The girl swung her hammer again, metal striking stone with a harsh ring. The sound carried, sharp as a scream, and then the cannon moved. It was subtle at first, a slow, deliberate rotation of the barrel just a few inches, as if aligning. The kids didn't notice. Ellis did. His stomach dropped through the soles of his boots. The fog boiled outward in a sudden, silent burst. The air went dry and hot, making Ellis's throat ache. Static prickled in his ears, like 1,000 whispering voices. The cannon fired. There was no flash, no smoke, no shrapnel. Only an eruption of force, invisible but absolute, like the punch of a giant's fist through the world. A soundless concussion wave tore through the clearing, rattling the flagpole, knocking Ellis to his knees. The boy with the spray paint vanished mid-laugh. One instant there, the next gone. In his place was a scatter of ash drifting down in the fog. A can rolling away, hissing its last bit of paint. The girl dropped her hammer and clutched at her chest. A strangled cry caught in her throat. Her skin blackened and cracked in a heartbeat, fissures opening across her face and arms as if she were a statue left in a furnace. She toppled forward, hitting the ground with a brittle sound, breaking apart into gray powder that blew away on the hot wind. The last boy, tall, thin, with a hoodie drawn tight, screamed. He hadn't been at the center of the blast. It had caught him off to the side, enough to hurl him backward but not enough to annihilate him. He landed hard against the stone steps, rolling to his knees. Blood poured from his nose and ears. His eyes were wide, pupils blown, staring at nothing. Ellis stumbled toward him, heart hammering. "Kid?" The boy shrieked, voice ragged and high. Metal mouths that scream." He clawed at his face, tearing bloody furrows down his cheeks. "They're in the fog. They're in the barrel." He scrambled to his feet, spinning, trying to run, but tripping over his own legs. "They eat sound. They eat it. They're looking at me." His words dissolved into sobs and broken laughter. Ellis reached for him, but the boy bolted, sprinting into the trees, vanishing into the fog like a ghost. His screams echoed for a long time before fading. Ellis turned back to the cannon. It was still now, immobile. The fog had settled into an eerie calm, hanging low and heavy. The crude red smiley face painted on the barrel was already running, streaking downward like blood. There was nothing left of the other two but footprints in the damp grass and a faint chemical tang of burned flesh. No bodies, no bones, just ash and empty air. Ellis's stomach lurched. He doubled over and vomited onto the stones, hands braced on his knees, the taste of bile mixed with the metallic sting of the fog. His ears were ringing like a struck bell. When he finally straightened, the cannon's barrel was angled slightly down, as if acknowledging him. Not threatening, not warning, waiting. Ellis took a trembling step closer. The iron was warm beneath his palm, warm and alive, like the flank of some enormous beast. "What are you?" he whispered. The cannon gave no answer. It sat silent and still, its mouth dark and bottomless, as if nothing had happened at all. But the ash drifting its base said otherwise. And somewhere beyond the trees, a boy was running blind through the night, his mind shattered by whatever he had glimpsed in that blast. Ellis stood there for a long time, alone in the fog, feeling the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on him from all sides. Chapter 4. The Bond. The fog had become part of Ellis's life now, Like a second skin he wore every evening without thinking about it. He no longer tried to fight the chill that clung to his bones, or the metallic tang that lingered on his tongue. In some strange way, it was beginning to feel like home. The cannon stood at the center of it all, dark and hulking, its barrel always a little different each night, as if it shifted subtly while no one looked. Ellis's habits changed. He stayed later, well past midnight, sometimes until dawn, patrolling the grounds, smoking on the same bench where he'd sat the night of the first blast. The tremor in his hands had faded, and a strange sense of calm had begun to fill him, a predator's calm, sharp-edged and alert. The noises of the night didn't bother him anymore. The whispering static in the fog no longer felt threatening. It felt like a lullaby. But there was also the watching. He felt it constantly now, not like eyes, but like an atmosphere pressing against his skin, heavy and electric. Wherever he went within the memorial grounds, the air shifted, the fog moved, and the cannon seemed to track him, not obviously, but in small, telling ways. He'd walk past it and swear the barrel had lowered a fraction, like a head bowing. He'd stop halfway across the clearing and glance back to find it facing his direction, even though it hadn't a moment before. It didn't frighten him. Not anymore. It was the opposite of fear. It felt safe. That's why the attack caught him off guard. It happened on a Friday night, just after 2 a.m. Ellis had been making his rounds, flashlight slicing thin beams through the mist, when he heard the crunch of boots on gravel behind him. Heavy, stumbling. He turned just as a man lurched out of the fog, a local he recognized vaguely from the diner, a big man with a scruffy beard and a belly under his dirty Carhartt jacket. His breath reeked of whiskey. "What are you doing out here, old man?" the stranger slurred, stepping close. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, but there was a mean edge in them. "This your big toy?" He jabbed a thumb at the cannon, swaying on his feet. "Think you own the place?" Ellis raised his hands. "Park's closed, pal. Go home." The drunk sneered. "Don't tell me what to do, you old freak." He shoved Ellis hard. The force rattled his ribs. The man smelled like sweat and stale liquor. "Heard about the kids. They say you're the one who did it. You cooked 'em. Crazy old Nam vet, yeah?" Ellis's heart thudded once, hard. He felt a hot pulse run through the fog, as if the very air was responding to his anger. Somewhere behind him the cannon made a soft metallic groan, iron shifting against iron. The drunk raised his arm as if to strike. "Bet you got a gun in that shack of yours. Bet you." He didn't finish. There was no flash, no blast, no sound, but a wet, crunching pop. The man's body convulsed violently, his eyes rolling back. An invisible pressure gripped him mid-step and folded him like paper. Bones cracked in a sick staccato rhythm, ribs caving inward, arms twisting at unnatural angles. His scream was short and cut off, replaced by a gurgling cough as blood sprayed from his mouth in a fine mist. His knees buckled and then collapsed entirely, legs telescoping under his weight with a snapping sound like breaking branches. He hit the ground in a heap, unrecognizable as human for a moment, limbs bent and compacted, his torso crushed like a tin can. Steam rose from his skin. His head lolled at an angle no neck should allow. Ellis stumbled back, hand to his mouth. He hadn't touched him. He hadn't done anything. The fog swirled lazily between him and the corpse. The cannon stood silent, but its barrel had rotated just slightly toward Ellis, then slowly upward again, as though it had finished an action and was resetting itself. There were no witnesses, no weapons, only the echo of bone breaking still rattling in Ellis's ears. He stood frozen for a long time, staring at what was left of the man. Finally, almost in a trance, he dragged the body to the edge of the woods and left it there, hidden beneath the drooping limbs of an old pine. By morning, someone else would find it. Or maybe they wouldn't. That night was the first time Ellis didn't feel sick after the violence. He should have been horrified. He should have called the cops. Instead, there was a grim comfort in knowing it protected him. The dreams began soon after. He woke each morning in his small apartment above the visitor center, sheets damp with sweat, his heart hammering. Images clung to him long after dawn, soldiers in faded blue and gray uniforms, their faces pale and waxen, their eyes pits of shadow. They marched in silence across a battlefield of ash and broken trees, bayonets glinting. He heard their whispers like a rising wind, 1,000 voices chanting words he couldn't quite understand. Sometimes he saw them crouched around the cannon, caressing it like a holy relic. Sometimes he saw them pulling at its wheels, dragging it forward through mud that smelled like blood. And always, just before he woke, one soldier would turn toward him, face cracked, lips torn, and mouth a single word. He could never hear it, but it felt like his name. Ellis began talking to the cannon in the quiet hours of the night. At first it was a joke, muttered comments as he made his rounds. "Fog's thick tonight," he'd say, or "Guess it's just you and me." But then he started speaking more, real conversations, recounting his day, telling it about his nightmares. It began to respond, not with words, not with any sound he could hear, but with motion. A subtle rotation of the barrel when he approached, a slight elevation when he laid his hand on the iron. Once, when he whispered, "Are you listening?" the cannon's wheels creaked softly and shifted a fraction of an inch toward him. He should have been terrified. Instead, he felt something like kinship. Under the pale glow of the memorial lights, surrounded by fog and whispers, Ellis stood with his palm flat on the warm iron. His breath came slow and steady. "You're not just a gun," he murmured. "You're alive, aren't you?" The cannon tilted its barrel upward, slow and deliberate, the motion unmistakable now. Ellis's mouth went dry. His heart didn't race. He felt protected. He felt chosen. Chapter 5. SCP Intervention. The black SUVs rolled into the memorial lot just before dawn, their matte finish swallowing the weak morning light. Ellis stood behind the wrought iron gate, arms folded, a cigarette burning low between his fingers, watching them with narrowed eyes. He knew government muscle when he saw it, the posture, the boots, the absence of insignia. 4 stepped out, dressed in charcoal-grow tactical gear with equipment that looked too advanced for any federal agency he was familiar with. The 5th exited the last vehicle, a tall man in a trench coat that fluttered in the breeze like a morning shroud. He didn't wear a uniform, but his presence screamed authority. Agent Murdoch. He introduced himself with a clipped tone, flashing a laminated ID that read Department of Historical Site Preservation, which Ellis didn't believe for a second. His handshake was cold, dry, and brief. His eyes never stopped moving, darting past Ellis toward the cannon, toward the fog still curling low against the earth like the breath of something sleeping. "We're here for a routine assessment," Murtaugh had said. But Ellis knew the scent of a lie. They set up quickly. Tripod scanners, spectral imaging lenses, radiation detectors, and equipment that hummed with a pitch just beneath hearing. The team moved with practiced efficiency, speaking into radios in coded jargon. One of them, a woman with steel-gel hair, placed a sensor directly on the cannon's breech. The cannon didn't react, not at first, but Ellis watched, closely. As the team moved through the grounds, taking samples, snapping photos, adjusting instruments, the cannon began to rotate, slow, almost imperceptible turns that followed their positions. Its movements were silent, deliberate, like a predator choosing which target to prioritize. None of them seemed to notice. Ellis did. He felt it in his teeth, in the hairs bristling on his arms, in the tight coil in his chest that wound tighter with every quiet shift of the iron barrel. He stayed silent. He didn't warn them. They didn't speak to him again that day. By nightfall, a perimeter of equipment ringed the memorial. The gate had been locked from the outside. Ellis was confined within the grounds, which suited him just fine. He lit another cigarette and stood near the cannon. "You don't like 'em, do you?" he muttered. The fog responded first. It crept in early, thicker than usual, and this time it didn't drift, it pushed. The mist coiled tightly around the Foundation's devices, wrapping wires and sensors in its damp embrace. A motion detector sparked once, then went dark. A Geiger counter shrieked briefly before shutting off with a whine. Murdoch's team noticed. At 200 hours, the lead tech radioed a status report. "Multiple device failures, static on infrared, thermals going blind." Murdoch's voice came sharp and tight. "Reboot. Recalibrate. Do not approach the artifact." They'd labeled it now SCP-011. Ellis overheard them in fragments, coded language, and clinical detachment. They spoke of anomalous kinetic discharge, unexplained thermic damage patterns, and localized spatial distortion around the cannon's base. The words were sterile. They had no weight, no soul. They didn't feel it. Murdoch did, though. Ellis caught him standing alone at the foot of the cannon just before dawn. Everyone else had gone to sleep or returned to the vans. Murdoch stood in silence, staring up at the mouth of the barrel. He reached out once, just his fingers grazing the rim of iron. His lips moved, whispering something Ellis couldn't hear. The cannon shifted. Its barrel dropped a full inch in less than a second, locking directly on Murdoch's chest. The motion was swift and final. Murdoch froze. He didn't step back, didn't raise a weapon. He simply stared. Then he turned and walked away. Ellis stepped out from the shadows of the trees as Murdoch passed. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment Ellis saw it. Recognition. Not suspicion. Not hostility. Understanding. Later that morning, Ellis pretended to fix a cracked fence post near the equipment tent. He listened. "She didn't fire," Murdoch said to the steel-hailed tech. "But she watched me, like a dog waiting to see if you're friend or threat." "You think it's aware?" she asked. Murdoch nodded slowly. "Not just aware, symbiotic. It's been here too long to be just reactive. It chooses when to act. It didn't fire on the drunk last week for fun." "You're saying it's protecting someone?" A pause. "I'm saying it has a bond," Murdoch replied. "And if we agitate it too much, it'll act again." They both looked toward Ellis. He didn't flinch. The Foundation's presence lingered for days. They installed disguised cameras, buried seismic sensors, set up a false ranger station nearby. Murdoch remained hands-off after that night. He watched. He logged. He didn't touch. Ellis resumed his rounds, each night feeling the cannon's gaze follow him like a loyal guardian. Once, as he passed by and whispered, "They'll try to move you," the cannon rotated ever so slightly to face the woods, where the Foundation's van hid in the brush. That night, the fog swallowed their feed. All recordings corrupted, all sensors blank. And all around the cannon the mist danced like smoke from a funeral pyre. Chapter 6. The Siege. By the second week of the Foundation's occupation, the memorial no longer looked like a park. It looked like a war camp. Tripod sensors sprouted like blackened weeds across the clearing. Tangled cords ran in a spider web around the cannon's pedestal, snaking into humming crates with flickering screens. Surveillance poles rose at each corner of the grounds, red indicator lights pulsing dimly in the fog. It smelled of wet earth and hot electronics, a battlefield of a different age. Ellis had learned to move through it all like a ghost, silent and watchful. The cannon stood at the center, unmoving during daylight, its iron skin wet with dew, but at night, when the mist rolled in and the temperature dropped, the ground felt like it was breathing beneath his boots. One by one, the Foundation's devices began to fail. It started small. Flickers in the monitors, soft hiss of static replacing their feeds. A week later, the perimeter alarm stopped tripping. The infrared cameras showed nothing but rolling gray waves, no matter how they recalibrated. Murdoch's team changed batteries, swapped sensors, even replaced entire rigs. Every piece of equipment aimed at the cannon or its base simply went dark. Sometimes the failure was quiet, a slow draining of power. Other times it was violent, accompanied by a sharp pop and a burst of acrid smoke as capacitors blew. The techs grew tense. They whispered about field interference and localized EM surges. Ellis caught fragments of their reports: temporal displacement, psychic contamination, artifact rejection. He didn't need the jargon. He could feel it. The cannon didn't like being watched. And at night, it wasn't alone. The first time Ellis saw them clearly, it was near 3 a.m. He'd been walking his circuit past the shattered marble fountain when the fog thickened, curling like a curtain being drawn across the clearing. For a heartbeat, the world went silent, as if the air itself had been held. Then, on the edges of the mist, figures began to appear. Not shadows, not tricks of light. Men. They stood in a line, half seen through the swirling gray, their outlines sharp where the fog bent around them. Their uniforms were ragged blue and gray, tattered by age and battle. Bayonets glinted faintly in their hands, faces pale as wax, mouths stitched shut or missing entirely. Empty sockets where eyes should be stared forward with an intensity that burned through the mist. Their boots left no prints, their breath rose as no steam. They weren't human anymore. They were sentinels. Ellis froze, the hair on his arms lifting. His heart should have pounded, but it didn't. He felt recognition, a terrible kinship, like meeting old comrades in a place you didn't expect. They didn't advance. They just watched him. Watched everything. Their heads turned in unison when a Foundation agent walked past, tracking him with perfect precision. By dawn, they were gone. Only the fog remained. On the third night of their vigil, a young agent broke the invisible truce. He was new, barely more than a kid, with a buzz cut and the restless energy of someone who didn't believe in ghosts. He'd been tasked with running a new batch of readings near the cannon's base. As he crouched by the pedestal, fiddling with the scanner, he muttered under his breath, "Whole thing's a joke. Some rusty old gun. People died over this?" His laugh was sharp and ugly in the still air. Ellis was halfway across the clearing when he felt the shift. The fog surged inward, coiling around the cannon's wheels like a tightening noose. The iron vibrated, low and hungry. The shadows of the ghost soldiers straightened, bayonets angled down, as if readying a charge. The cannon fired. There was no muzzle flash, no smoke. Just a thunderous concussive whump that hit Ellis in the chest like a hammer. The ground directly in front of the mocking agent erupted, dirt and stone exploding upward in a geyser of earth. A crater 3 feet deep yawned where he'd been kneeling a heartbeat earlier. The force threw him backward like a rag doll, tumbling him across the gravel path. He hit the ground hard, arms over his head, screaming. He wasn't ash, he wasn't broken, but the message was clear. Ellis ran toward him. "Stay still," he barked. Don't say another word." The agent's eyes rolled in terror. His scanner lay crushed, smoking gently, its metal warped as though it had been struck by lightning. His lips trembled, but he didn't speak. The cannon was silent again. Its barrel had returned to a neutral angle, pointed harmlessly at the sky. Murdoch arrived moments later, boots pounding the dirt. His face was pale but controlled. "Get him up," he ordered 2 techs, then turned to Ellis, his eyes narrowing. "Did you see that?" Ellis didn't answer. He was staring at the ghostly soldiers. They hadn't faded this time. They stood at attention around the crater, their pale faces turned toward him. They weren't threatening. They were acknowledging him. Waiting. When Ellis looked back at the cannon, the fog thinned just enough for the iron to glisten wetly under the floodlights. It almost looked like sweat or blood. That night, Ellis sat on his bench long after the Foundation had retreated to their vans. The fog pressed close, warm against his skin. "You're protecting me," he whispered, eyes fixed on the dark mouth of the barrel. "But from what?" The cannon's barrel rotated a fraction toward him, slow and deliberate. Ellis swallowed. A cold thought slid into his mind, uninvited. "Or am I protecting you?" The fog swirled around his boots, and the phantom soldiers dissolved back into it, their forms fading like smoke from a battlefield long forgotten. Chapter 7. The Mass Grave. The storm broke just after midnight. Thunder rolled across the hills like cannon fire, and rain came down in cold sheets, hammering the memorial grounds, smearing the red clay into ribbons. Ellis was out in it, hunched against the downpour, flashlight beam trembling across the wet stones. He hadn't planned to be here this late, but the fog had returned thicker than ever, swallowing the entire park. It carried a strange scent tonight, coppery, like fresh blood stirred into rainwater. He had been pacing when he noticed it, a seam in the earth at the base of the cannon's pedestal. It was new. The heavy rain had washed away decades of soil, exposing the edge of a stone slab he'd never seen before. The water pooled there in a thin, dark mirror. Ellis knelt, hands slick with mud, scraping at the edges. The stone was rough-hewn, not part of the memorial's original construction. When he pried his fingers into the gap, a breath of air rose from beneath it, warm, fetid, and metallic. Not the damp rot of earth. Something older. His heart thudded. The cannon loomed above him, its iron surface wet and gleaming under the flicker of the lightning. For a moment he thought he felt it vibrate under his hands, like the low hum of a living thing. He pushed harder. The slab shifted with a groan that sounded too much like a voice. Rainwater poured down into the dark opening, vanishing without a splash. Ellis's flashlight beam followed. The hole gaped into a stairwell of mud and rotted stone leading downwards, swallowed by darkness. Without thinking, he descended. The steps were slick, uneven, cut into the earth itself. Roots dangled from the ceiling like black veins. The smell grew stronger with each step, rust and old iron, but also something sweet and foul. The smell of long decayed flesh. He reached the bottom and found himself standing in a cavernous chamber beneath the cannon. The ceiling arched low, supported by beams of rotted timber. Pools of black water reflected the flashlight's thin, beam-like eyes. At first he thought the shapes scattered across the floor were just rocks, but as he drew closer, his stomach turned. They were bones. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Skeletal remains stacked and scattered in grotesque heaps, skulls cracked and caved in, ribs snapped and curling outward. Many of them still wore tatters of blue wool uniforms clinging to the bone, the faded brass buttons green with age. Some of the skulls had iron rivets driven through them. Others were fused to jagged fragments of metal like grotesque ornaments. In the dim light it looked as though the bones themselves had been welded to pieces of cannon parts, shards of wheels, splintered axles, sections of the barrel itself. Ellis stumbled forward, light sweeping the chamber. He saw a femur fused to a length of iron chain, a hand still gripping a shattered ramrod, a jawbone clamped around a piece of lead shot. It wasn't random. It was ritual. The cannon had not merely been forged, it had been fed. A whisper rose from the darkness. It wasn't the hiss of wind through the beams or the trickle of water through stone. It was a voice. Then another. Then dozens. Thin and papery, like dead leaves scraping across a grave. We gave it purpose. Ellis froze, flashlight shaking in his grip. Now it gives us vengeance. He spun, but there was no one, only shadows. The voices grew louder, weaving together like a choir of the dead. He could feel the vibration in his bones, not in his ears. Images flashed behind his eyes, Union soldiers dragging the cannon across a battlefield, their faces gray and hollow, bodies torn and bleeding. He saw them pouring their blood into the molten iron, hammering it into shape with hands already dying. He saw them swearing oaths with tongues bitten through. Lightning cracked above, and for a heartbeat the chamber glowed with a dull, reddish light, not from his flashlight. The bones seemed to shimmer, their iron fusions pulsing faintly like veins carrying some ancient current. Oh. Ellis fell to his knees. "What are you?" he whispered. The chorus hissed. "Bound in iron, forged in blood, awakened by desecration." The flashlight flickered. In the momentary dark, he saw them. Figures standing among the bones. The soldiers from his dreams, their uniforms tattered, their faces pale and eyeless. Bayonets in their hands. Hands that were more metal than flesh. They stood around the base of the stairwell like an honor guard, heads bowed toward the ceiling where the cannon sat above. The whispers crawled across his skin like 1,000 insects. "They broke their oath, they mocked our memory, and we will not sleep." Ellis felt the words slide into his skull like nails. He saw flashes of the cannon's history, not in dates or names, but in sensations: mud, screams, fire, steel. He saw soldiers dying at its wheels, blood soaking the earth where he now knelt. Their rage had not faded. It had condensed into the iron itself, a hunger bound in a weapon. The chamber pulsed once, like a heartbeat. The iron fragments in the bones glowed faintly red, as though still hot from the forge. Ellis staggered backward, eyes fixed on the apparition of a soldier kneeling before him, its cracked lips moving soundlessly before the whisper rose again, louder than before. "We gave it purpose. Now it gives us vengeance." His flashlight died completely. For a moment there was only darkness, the whisper of countless dead men, and the knowledge, settling into Ellis's bones like cold lead, the cannon had not chosen him. It had been waiting for him. When he scrambled up the stairwell, mud slipping under his boots, he could feel the heat rising from below. The fog outside poured into the opening like breath-filling lungs. As he reached the surface, the cannon loomed over him, its barrel wet and gleaming, angled slightly downward as though acknowledging what he had seen. The rain had stopped. The air was still. Ellis's hands were black with mud and iron dust, his heart hammering like a drum. The voices from below echoed faintly in his skull. "We gave it purpose. Now it gives us vengeance." The cannon's iron mouth seemed deeper than ever, like the opening to a tomb or a throat. Ellis backed away slowly, but his eyes never left it. For the first time since it had fired, he wondered if the thing at the center of the memorial was protecting him, or preparing him. Chapter 8. Breach Protocol. It happened at 500 hours. The final decision came through a scrambled transmission on Murdoch's secured line, brief, cold, and absolute. Angled SCP-011 is now officially classified as Euclid. Authorization granted for on-site containment and relocation if viable. Breach protocols approved. All associated anomalies, including human assets, are to be evaluated for influence and potential compromise. Proceed immediately. No one questioned it. The string of escalating incidents, the fog thickening with unnatural patterns, the unexplained equipment failures, the camera blackouts, and most damningly, the psychic trauma reported by the surviving teenager and 2 researchers had piled high. The Foundation had waited long enough. The cannon had proven it was not inert, not historic, not safe. The orders were simple: contain, relocate, neutralize interference. Ellis had just stepped outside with his first cigarette when the flatbed containment rig pulled into the lot, escorted by 2 black armored vehicles. The rig was massive, an articulated machine built like a siege weapon itself, designed for transporting anomalous artifacts of dangerous scale. A heavy steel lifting arm bristled from its rear, lined with reinforced clamps, electromagnets, and a mounted sonic disruptor for containment destabilization. 6 agents in full Class IV hazmat combat armor exited the transports, faces obscured behind reinforced visors. They moved quickly, with brutal precision, their boots pounding over the gravel in sync. Murdoch followed close behind, jaw clenched, voice barking orders into his comm. Ellis watched them roll out heavy anchors and dig hydraulic mounts into the dirt around the cannon. The fog had already begun to rise again, sluggish at first, then growing more aggressive, pressing in from the trees like coiling tendrils. The cannon remained still, but the air around it felt electric, twitching like nerves before a seizure. "Don't do this," Ellis said aloud, not to the team, but to the cannon. "Not yet. Not like this." As if in answer, the ground trembled. The agents didn't stop. Murdoch approached Ellis with a forced calm in his voice. "We've monitored your behavior, Ellis. You've been down there, in the chamber. We know you've formed a connection." Ellis didn't deny it. He didn't need to. Murdoch's eyes flicked to the cannon. "We've seen enough to classify you as a Class K anomaly-influenced entity. You're compromised." He gestured, and 2 agents stepped toward Ellis with zip ties and a containment bag. Ellis backed away. "You don't understand. It's not just protecting me. I'm a part of it now. If you move it, if you try to separate it." Murdoch's voice was iron. "If we don't, more people die." The agents lunged. They never reached him. With a sound like the earth itself rupturing, the cannon fired. There was no warning, only a massive concussive blast that shattered the front end of the flatbed like a child's toy. Steel split like bone, flames bursting from ruptured fuel lines. One of the armored vehicles flipped on its side, metal shrieking, landing in a heap of scorched debris. 3 agents were instantly vaporized, nothing left but smears of armor and scorched earth. The others were thrown through the air, landing in twisted heaps, helmets cracked, limbs bent the wrong way. One screamed, high and pitiful, until his lungs collapsed. The seismic ripple tore through the park, splitting the flagstone path and knocking over 2 of the memorial statues. A nearby tree collapsed, its trunk fractured, sending splinters the size of spears into the dirt. Ellis was untouched. He stood in the center of the storm, the fog circling him protectively. The cannon's barrels slowly lowered again, smoke hissing from its mouth like breath from a beast. Murdoch crawled from beneath a twisted railing, blood streaming down the side of his face. He stared at Ellis, not in fear, not in anger, but with a kind of grim understanding. "You can't protect it forever," he rasped. "It's not your friend, Ellis. It's using you." Ellis said nothing. He felt the heat radiating from the cannon, felt the voices in the fog, low and insistent. "They desecrate the soil. We defend it. You are bound to us. You are the last." His heart pounded. His mind burned. A part of him wanted to fight the Foundation, to stand in front of the cannon like a martyr, but another part, some deep human flicker of doubt, wondered if Murdoch was right. Was the cannon protecting him? Or was it anchored to him, needing him to remain awake, aware, complicit? He turned to the weapon, its black mouth still aimed at the broken rig. He could feel it, waiting. And beneath that, deep and terrible, was the knowledge that if he chose to walk away, it might follow. In the shattered silence, the fog swirled tighter. Somewhere behind it, another soldier's shade stood at attention, its bayonet dipped in salute. Ellis looked at the bodies, at Murdoch crawling to his feet, and then at the cannon. Torn, caught between steel and soul. between man and machine. Chapter 9. The Stand. The sky had turned the color of bruised flesh by the time the second wave arrived. 6 black transports, 2 armored drones, a mobile command trailer bristling with antennas. The SCP Foundation had not come to bargain. They had come to end it. The containment squad stepped out in perfect formation, 12 agents clad in matte white armor, faces hidden behind visor masks etched with designation codes. Their gear shimmered with anti-anomalous modifications, sonic disruptors, EMP cannons, ArcNet guns, and suppression gel canisters. Each of them bore the cold discipline of soldiers who had watched gods bleed and refused to flinch. They didn't speak, they moved as one. Murdoch stood at the edge of the lot, face pale beneath dried blood, issuing clipped commands into a headset. His expression was unreadable. Ellis watched it all from the shadow of the statue of Colonel Ward, just beneath the cannon's platform. The fog around him no longer felt protective, it felt mournful. Heavy, like a funeral procession's last breath. He knew what was coming. He climbed the cracked stairs slowly, each step echoing like a tolling bell. The cannon loomed ahead, its iron surface dark and glistening under the storm-lit sky. Its barrel was angled slightly downward, silent, still, but he could feel it, tensing. Eddie was awake. The fog rippled in waves around the platform as Ellis reached the top and turned to face the clearing. The squad had formed a perimeter. Their weapons were trained on the cannon. Red tracking lasers danced across the stone like a swarm of insects. Ellis raised both hands, his voice cracked but held firm. "Don't fire, it's listening." No one moved. Murdoch stepped forward from the command trailer, his voice amplified by a shoulder-mount speaker. "Step away from the artifact, Ellis. Final warning." Ellis didn't move. His boots scraped gently against the stone as he turned to face the cannon, placing a palm against its cold flank. It trembled beneath his touch, barely perceptible, like a deep vibration, a great engine beginning to stir. "I know what you want," he whispered. "I know what you are. But this isn't the way." The cannon twitched. Its massive iron body shuddered as the barrel lifted, slow and deliberate, to face the clearing, locking directly onto the command trailer. The drones pivoted, targeting systems acquiring. Ellis's voice broke. "No, no, don't, please." The cannon hummed, a resonance that vibrated the stone under his feet. Sparks cracked across the air, electrical threads dancing along the metal rim of the barrel. The fog began to coil inward like a cyclone, converging on the cannon's mouth. The pressure in the air thickened until Ellis could barely breathe. He stepped into the cannon's path, arms wide. "You don't have to kill them," he said softly. "They're afraid, like we were. That doesn't make them wrong." The cannon trembled violently now. Ellis could see iron bolts vibrating in their sockets, see fractures spider-webbing across the base. The fog roared in his ears, the whispers of 1,000 dead soldiers shrieking through the storm. Desecrated it. They would tear us apart. They do not remember. Ellis pressed his forehead against the iron. "But I do." He closed his eyes. "I remember every scream, every order, every fire. I remember what it felt like to die without dying. I remember you." The cannon paused. The tremors ceased. The wind stilled. And then, with a sound like a hurricane breathing in, the cannon fired. Not a shell, not shrapnel. A concussive wave of pure force exploded from its mouth, a shock wave of static energy and resonance so intense that it sent every drone spinning, their rotors shearing apart in midair. The command trailer buckled inward, windows shattering, panels caving as all electronics inside sparked violently and went dark. Across the field, agents screamed as their headsets exploded, Visors cracked, weapons died in their hands. The air filled with a shrill, tinnitus-like tone that drove several to their knees. And then, silence. Not a single casualty. Not one death. Just devastation. The fog coiled gently around Ellis's ankles. The cannon's barrel lowered, slowly. He opened his eyes. The clearing was still. The Foundation squad had scattered like leaves in the wind. Their gear sizzled in silence, useless. Murdoch stood half-shielded behind a fallen drone, staring in awe. His headset hung limply from his neck. Ellis took a single step down from the pedestal, breath ragged. He looked to the cannon, its form steaming now from the exertion, its breath heavy and wet in the air. "You listened," he said. He didn't know if he was grateful, only that it had chosen mercy. And somewhere in the far corners of the fog, spectral soldiers lowered their bayonets, not in surrender, but in understanding. For the first time, they stood without formation, waiting for their captain to decide what came next. Chapter 10. Silence and Ashes. By the time the first frost glazed the memorial grounds, the site was no longer a park. It was a cordoned-off anomaly, a wound in the Vermont hills wrapped in barbed wire and false signage. Concrete barricades sealed the roads, and two-tiered security checkpoints flanked the entry gates, where armed guards now stood. The SCP Foundation's logo was stamped discreetly on every crate, every armored van, every rolled coil of reinforced cable. They called it a quarantine zone on paper. In practice, it felt like a battlefield under indefinite ceasefire. The cannon remained at the center of it all, black and silent, its iron skin dull under the cold light of halogen lamps mounted on telescoping poles. No fog now, just the bitter bite of winter air and the faint tang of oil from the machinery surrounding it. The Foundation had classified it Euclid officially, a neat clinical label that stripped it of its history. SCP-011, artifact, risk. But everyone who worked the perimeter felt it. The tension. The weight. The way the air shifted if you lingered too close to the pedestal. Ellis had been gone 3 days when they found his hat. No one saw him leave. No cameras caught his exit. One moment he was there, moving like a specter through the snow, whispering to the cannon under his breath, and the next, nothing. His apartment above the visitor center was empty, the bed still warm, his few belongings neatly folded as though waiting for him to return. They searched the woods, they searched the town, they dragged the river. Nothing. Only his hat, an old, sweat-stained baseball cap sitting perfectly centered atop the cannon's breech, its bill pointing outward like an arrow. It hadn't been there the night before. There were no footprints in the snow leading to or from the pedestal. Murdoch was the one who climbed up and took it. He said later the iron felt hot under his hands, even in the freezing air. He held the hat for a long time, staring at the cannon's silent mouth before passing it off to an evidence tech. From that day on, the cannon no longer fired. No tremors, no fog, no ghostly soldiers in the mist. It sat inert. At least, it looked inert. But those who stayed long enough began to notice things. Subtle things. The way the halogen lights flickered when a guard walked past the pedestal. The faint, rhythmic creak of iron shifting at night when the wind was dead still. And most of all, the barrel's position. It never pointed the same way twice. If you stood in front of it for too long, it would slowly, silently adjust, the huge mass of iron turning degrees at a time until the dark bore of its mouth lined up perfectly with your chest. The movement was almost imperceptible until you realized it was happening. The Foundation tried to test it once. A junior researcher with more bravado than sense lingered in its shadow, staring into the barrel for nearly a minute. Cameras caught the subtle rotation, the slow tightening of its aim, and then, static, the footage ended. When the others arrived, the researcher was gone. Not ash, not blood. Just gone. They stopped testing after that. Winter deepened. Snow buried the mass grave Ellis had unearthed, smoothing over the broken earth like a white shroud. The air turned brittle and silent, the kind of cold that carried sound too far and made every footstep feel like an intrusion. The cannon sat like a tombstone at the center of it all. Weeks later, the Foundation assigned a new caretaker, an older man from out of state, hands calloused from years of maintenance work at other SCP sites. He was briefed on procedures, issued an ID badge, and told nothing about Ellis beyond previous asset removed. He arrived one pale morning to find the memorial deserted except for the heavy presence of the cannon. Its iron flanks steamed faintly in the cold. His breath plumed white as he set down his bag and surveyed his new post. He didn't notice at first how quiet it was, how heavy the silence felt, how his heartbeat seemed too loud in his ears. By the time he did, the whisper had already begun. A low metallic murmur, rising from nowhere and everywhere at once. Like a voice dragged across steel, like the groan of gears turning far beneath the earth. He froze, toolbag slipping from his fingers, eyes scanning the snow. The whisper threaded through the cold air, words forming in a language he shouldn't understand but somehow did. Protect the keeper. Guard the blood. He turned slowly toward the cannon. Its barrel was angled directly at him now, black and bottomless, a void cut into iron. Snowflakes drifted into its mouth and vanished without a sound. The man shivered, unsure whether from the cold or from something else. In the distance, beyond the wire and barricades, a lone crow took off from a branch, its caw echoing across the hills before fading into silence. The new groundskeeper swallowed hard. The whisper continued. And above it all, the cannon sat, unmoving, waiting, its dark throat like an open wound in the winter air. Patient, watchful, alive.